I had the opportunity to attend the Stand Up Speak Out meeting dinner last night, and where there were two honored members of our community, but then there was a third group. And this was kind of a surprise group, and one of the board members is actually a part of this group, and it's called Game On for Kansas Schools. And Donna Bisfield has been working on this group, and they were recognized for the organization that has come together to educate our populace on everyday happenings, to understand school finance and ask questions, they shall answer. But these are things that we need in the general public, because a lot of people do not understand or get the real facts. They may get rumor, they may get innuendo, but they may not get facts. And so I'd like to turn it over to, if it's okay, to my fellow board member who really has a better description of what this does. But it was quite an honor for them to receive this award last night. So
I think what I will do best, the chairperson for this is Judith Deedy, and she had a very short description of what Game On for Kansas Schools is, and she did indeed thank the mainstream on behalf of the leadership group of Game On and on behalf of all the people who have participated on the Facebook page, visited the website, joined the email list, and helped us share our message. Game On is a true grassroots effort. There are Republicans, Democrats, and independents involved. As parents, teachers, and other concerned community members who see that budget cuts are real and that the privatization agenda is real and will not benefit children in Kansas, we are people who have decided we can't sit idly by while Kansas schools are threatened. We will walk to Topeka, we will write letters to the editor, and we will shine a light on the players and policies affecting Kansas education. And she thanked Mainstream for providing a model for bringing people together across party lines to work to protect the things we value most. We thank you for your organization and your member support. We have encountered the wrath of some people, which makes us appreciate our friends even more. We've come a long way in about the last 4.5 or 5 years, but we have many more people to reach, educate, and get into the game. We ask that everyone help and learn the current issues, share your knowledge with your friends, your families, and your neighbors, and communicate with your legislators and hold them accountable. I might also mention that all of the people involved in this certainly are volunteers. There are no paid staff, and truly, if there are financial needs, the hat gets passed. I thought about saying on a shoestring budget. I think it's a thread, not a shoestring. So it truly is a group that has worked hard and has reached a lot of people, and certainly you can find out about them on either Facebook or their website.
Thank you. Any other board comments? Mrs. Mack.
I just wanted to recognize last Thursday we had a reception for the National Merit finalists, and it was enjoyable to see the kids there, and of course their parents. And I really appreciated Dr. Henson asking them to stand up and say what they wanted to do with their futures and where they wanted to go to school. It was, we have incredible students, we have incredible staff that teach our students, and it was just a night of celebration. And district sports are winding down. I'm not going to give a sports report, but the fall sports are winding down, and we hit the end of the first quarter. Winter sports are winding down, and I can't believe November's this week. So
It is indeed.
anyway, no sports report, but they're all winding down.
They are indeed. Any other comments?
I will just dovetail onto Mrs. Max for the National Merit. I think they're semifinalists yet, aren't they?
I think we had
Are they finalists? Whatever.
Semifinals.
The kids showed up there. There are 20 semifinalists from the district and 37 commended. So we have a very good turnout and a great showing in that regard. But it was fun to hear what their plans were, and some are really altruistic of what they wanted to do, and the courses, you know, the life that they wanted to follow from here. So that was great. We've also had just, I think the week prior or 2 weeks prior to that, the international students, our foreign exchange students, which if you've never attended that, it's really fun because we ask them what they like best about going to school in Shawnee Mission. And school spirit, I think, won out. I think one person said it, they all kind of jumped onto that. But I think that is something very unique as they come to Shawnee Mission, to America, and experience that. So that's always very fun. And 20, how many countries was it? It was an amazing number. Estonia and all of these places that I don't remember ever having exchange students from. It was really neat. So I just wanted to make mention of that. And that we will move on to the legislative workshop. Stuart, or Dr. Hinsett, or whoever here, I'm sorry.
Stuart, if you'll join me up here, that'll be great. As you know, we've had multiple meetings with not only individual legislators, small groups, but also inviting our delegation as well. With that, most recently, we've started looking at our legislative platform. So what you have before you tonight, we've simply taken the legislative platform from 13, changed it to 14, and made a few tweaks in it. A couple of things of note. We did put, instead of support a reformed school finance formula, support a new or reformed school finance formula. We have not put these items in priority order at all, and so certainly that's something that can be adjusted. I know you'll have some additions to that. So far, we've left some standing positions in place. Those positions to keep the local school board elections in the spring in order to retain a nonpartisan focus. Oppose legislation that would provide tuition tax credits or vouchers, and oppose unfunded mandates or programs. So standing positions have remained there. Certainly we can expand that if you so desire. And then we've kept in there some current funding levels do not allow the district to do various things. And so you'll see those in place. We have additional space if we want to add things. If not, we'll use pictures of students in that regard. But this is the first draft based upon what we've heard thus far. And so that's why we're having, obviously, this discussion tonight. So, Stuart, thanks for being here tonight. I know you're gearing up for a very busy time of the year that's right around the corner. You know, I also might note as well, we've heard all kinds of stories about when there might be a Gannon decision and what that decision might look like. We don't know that. We have heard some rhetoric that if the decision is not reasonable according to some folks, we might see a lot of things introduced in the legislative session that we would be opposed to in the process. We'll just have to follow that with great interest because that decision could certainly have an impact on this legislative session. That's yet to be determined. So, Stuart, words of wisdom, guidance for us tonight.
Well, thank you, Dr. Henson, and members of the board. I'm happy to be here, and just a couple of comments. You know, we can edit this platform in any way you'd like to see that done. Additionally, one of the things from the first conversations that Dr. Henson and I had in talking about planning for the legislative session, then kind of fleshed out in meetings we had with the legislators, was a desire on the part of some of our members of our legislative delegation to not just be getting emails from us and conversations from me when there are issues up, but the potential for having some meetings with members of our delegation during the legislative session. And so that's something that Dr. Henson and I have exchanged some communications about, setting some of those up so that at kind of some regular monthly intervals during the session, we'll be able to sit down because you know, who knows when things are going to come during that time frame, but that may be something. We have always kind of hosted a lunch or had a lunch meeting, or when there's been a big key issue, we've had superintendent come over and have some meetings, but this is, I think, going to be an attempt in some structured fashion to have a little more regular contact with them so they just don't hear from us when we're ready for them to do something on one issue or the other. The other thing that I would suggest that there are an extensive number of issues left over from the 2013 legislative session that can come up during the next, during 2014. And I have a list of these, and I sent a memo to Dr. Henson a month or so ago, and I'll just give these to you, Terry, and circulate them. But but this is just, it's a document that is, the first 2 pages, I was giving Dr. Henson a summary of the legislation that was passed last legislative session, but beginning on page 2 for the next 4 pages is essentially a laundry list of legislation that did not pass last year that's still sitting around. And so, I'm not going to go over each of those topics, but you can see the number and the range of issues that are out there that have the potential to be, to come up. And I think the key issue, of course, is when and where, what the Supreme Court decision is and what impact that has, because it has the potential to open up a lot of topics. And I think you could probably pick 5 things off those last 4 pages, and they could all wind up in a couple of education bills at some point. So I'm happy to respond to any questions, if you have any suggestions about the platform or to the...
Mrs. Neighbor?
Stuart, with this being an election year too, what do you see them sitting on, because it is an election year? We've heard from some that they won't touch some of these things because of that, so.
Obviously, the immediacy of an election and being in a legislative session in the same year that there'll be an election, it does, I think, have some impact on the kinds of issues that come up, and oftentimes there are votes made to make election points or votes against things to make election points. But I think, not that I could specifically point to things on the list and say, yes, this is an election related or it's not. I think what will really be telling and interesting, and that's a scary way to describe it, but if you're dealing with a Supreme Court decision and you have people that are attempting to put packages together to come to some resolution to respond to the court, I think you can have a conversation even with members of our delegation or many other delegations around the state of Kansas, and I'm not sure you could get a majority of those group of people to agree on what their appropriate response should be. And that may be the same thing that happens in the legislature, because some of the things that one party may believe, this is good for the schools and good for me in the election, there may be people who feel like this is good for me in the election and I'm going to say it's good for the schools, and those things may not match up. So I think this is the 9th year I've worked for you all, and this is the first time I think I've come up here and I can honestly say I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen come January 13th. So.
Well, we've got some people here who might.
Yeah, maybe. What's going to happen?
They don't know either.
Stuart, are there things that you think specifically should be in our legislative platform that are not in the draft version?
I think when I'm thinking about the issues that are going to come up, moving election dates, common Kansas standards, there's one thing that is not on this list right now that I think is likely to come back up again, and that is capers. At the end of the legislative session last year, the year before, we went to this, we've changed again, but it's a cash basis, cash balance plan, I think it's the name of it, where it's kind of like a 401k, but you're guaranteed a rate of return. At the end of last legislative session, there were some folks that really wanted to push and move for future employees, not for current employees, but for future employees, to a full 401k program. And there was a strong push to try to get a bunch of the new legislators to all go for that at the end of the regular session, and I think they were told we don't know enough about capers yet. So I think that definitely will come up and be an issue. So to the extent that you all may want to consider some language with regard to that, that's possible. I'll mention probably, other than school finance, what is probably the biggest issue that the legislature will confront next year, and it's going to directly have an impact on you, but I don't know exactly how we articulate it in a legislative platform, and that is a proposal following on the heels of 2 years of tax policy that was implemented through the elimination of small business taxes and stepping down income tax rates, and then last year eliminating deductions and taking down income tax rates to try to get down to a no-income tax state by 2017. I think one of the most significant issues has to do with the machinery and equipment exemption, which is a tax discussion that's going on, that's been worked on for a couple of years. And that's an issue that directly relates to some large-scale manufacturers and what's get defined as real or personal property, and Kurt could talk for hours about this, I can't. But the legislature is going to make some decisions very likely about how to allow businesses to classify taxes and whether they're real or personal property. And if they get classified a certain way, they won't be taxed, and it has the potential to reduce the tax base tremendously, particularly as businesses would see that as a decision made related to some manufacturing businesses in Montgomery County, that if other entities took advantage of that new tax policy, it could have a tremendous impact on the tax base here, particularly over time. So I don't know how you would articulate something that specific in here, but that will be a tremendously important issue that the legislature discusses next year.
Mrs. Smith?
Stuart, I have a question, maybe it's for Dr. Hinson as well. I remember when we were discussing the platform in a meeting here that we had in this room with legislators, we talked about the expansion of capital outlay usage.
Right.
Is that something that you think we ought to have as part of our, specifically part of our platform, or do you think that?
Here's what
What's
I
your
would
thought
say
on
about
that?
and I appreciate the question. On that third page under school finance legislation, there's expansion of capital outlay, a locals activity budget, a local extracurricular activities budget, were three different pieces of legislation that came around last year. Your legislative platform as it exists says support greater opportunities to raise funds at the local level. And I think conceivably capital outlay in some measure could be included under that. If you want to keep in general that kind of a language that would encompass any variation that may come up, that general language may serve you just as well as saying we just want expansion of capital outlay, because of course, as you know, that's not necessarily new money, that's money that may be able to use for other resources or other.
Now, they did expand the use of capital outlay last year in legislation, but they had trigger mechanisms
Right.
that triggered that expansion to specific state actions that probably will never occur. So,
Fully funding the equalization, then it would go into.
I mean, even if they allowed those expansions of the capital outlay without those triggers, could help us. But as long as they have the triggers in there, there's no foreseeable future that we'll probably be able to utilize that.
Well, and I know several years ago, it was equalized, and then when they took it down to 75%, a lot of your smaller districts said, we're not supporting this because we really got chopped, we were on the chopping block. And so I think it would be very difficult to find enough votes to do it with those groups that feel like they've really been hit the hardest.
I think there's like a $25 million price tag to that
It's at least that.
statewide.
Any other questions? Dr.
Curtis,
Jen?
on the Capers bill, you mentioned Capers, there is some impact on current employees, even under the current legislation, because the working after retirement provisions sunset this year. If the legislature does not take action to extend those. And so we have probably about 30 employees that would be impacted that are either working as principals or teachers or other staff, that if they don't extend that law, will have an impact on how they draw their retirement and have their earnings.
So there may be some more room for some wording on these kind of capers-related issues, if that's.
Any other questions? Dr. Dillon?
Not a question so much. I think that our legislative platform should, I think, first and foremost, emphasize that the positions and the actions we take not for ourselves, but for the benefit of our children and our students. And I think you just need to put that out there as big a print as you can. I think the other thing, and it probably is hidden in the formula somewhere, talking about either revising or changing the formula. So I think it would be very important to state that if the legislature doesn't do anything else, if they would simply declare that a kindergarten student is one FTE, so that we can offer full-day kindergarten to our students without asking their parents to pay.
That's great. Comments? Okay, Stuart, thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Hinson.
You'll take this and sort of massage it a little bit
Right.
more,
Yes, sir.
and
Good.
we'll have some more input and another opportunity to talk about it.
Very good. All right.
Are we, one question, are we going to look at changing maybe the priorities on the front? I mean, have we
I think
discussed
that's
that
something
tonight, or
we
they're
can
going to do
in the
it?
editorial sense rather than in a-
order you want.
Okay.
Do you have a suggestion, Mrs. Neighbor?
Well, we had,
I think we probably want to start off with either the new reform or the rigorous academic standards and maybe just reorganize the way. I don't think any of these need to change. I just think the priorities, sort of like
Listed
Dr.
first.
Denny's talking about the front page. So I think that can be worked on by staff certainly on how to best show that.
Okay. So noted. Thank you. Any other comments? All right, Mrs. Mack.
Thank you, Mrs. Zila. I move that the Board of Education recess to executive session in order to discuss personnel matters regarding non-elected personnel.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Bisfield. And we will resume 7:45 now. How much time do we need? 8 o'clock? 8:15? 8:15, 30 minutes.
And no action will be
And no
And
further,
no further action will be taken after that time, so.
that's what I move.
Thank you. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Motion carries.